In June 2025, Los Angeles erupted. What started as protest against ice raids quickly descended into chaos. Autonomous vehicles set ablaze, federal agents attacked with concrete projectiles, highways shut down. Mexican flags waving while cars burned in the background. Then, in January 2026, just weeks ago, Minneapolis, same playbook, same organizations, same professionally printed signs appearing simultaneously in cities across America. The question everyone was asking, who's funding this? For years, the answer was always the same name whispered in conservative circles: George Soros, the billionaire boogeyman, the puppet master pulling strings. But when I actually followed the paper trail, the IRS filings, the congressional investigation letters, the 990 forms, I found something different. The money is real. The network is documented. And the trail exists. But the name at the center isn't George Soros, folks. It's a name most Americans probably have never heard of. Welcome to the Manufactured Mind. I'm your host, and today we're going to follow the money. All of it. From a $785 million tech company sale in 2017 through a labyrinth of shell nonprofits with addresses at UPS mailboxes to the streets of American cities in 2026. This is Follow the Money, the Singham Network. So, let's start where the money starts. The year is 2017. A man named Neville Roy Singham sells his company, ThoughtWorks, an IT consultancy he founded in 1993, to a private equity firm called Apex Partners. The sale price, $785 million. Now, Singham wasn't your typical tech CEO. Born in 1954, he'd grow up in the radical politics of the 1970s. As a young man at Howard University, he joined the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, a Maoist group based in Detroit. And here's where it gets interesting. In 1974, the FBI opened a file on Neville Roy Singham. The reason? He was being engaged in activities inimical to U.S. interests. That was 50 years ago, folks, and the FBI was watching him half a century ago. Fast forward to 2017, Singham is now worth nearly $1 billion, and almost immediately after selling ThoughtWorks, he does something highly unusual. He moves to Shanghai, China. Not retiring to a beach somewhere, not relocating to a tax haven, he moves to Shanghai, the financial capital of the People's Republic of China. And he stays there. Now you might be thinking, so what? Rich guy moves abroad, enjoys his money, maybe does some philanthropy. Nothing unusual about that, but that's not what happened. What happened was the creation of a financial network that would, according to congressional investigators, funnel over $250 million through a web of interconnected nonprofits, many with no websites, addresses at UPS mailboxes, and run by a rotating cast of former ThoughtWorks employees. And in 2023, the New York Times dropped a bombshell investigation claiming this network was, quote, working closely with the Chinese government media machine and financing its propaganda worldwide. So let me take you through what the documents that I've researched actually show. And this is purely based off of public research that I've done. So, the architecture. When investigators started pulling at this thread, they found 6 main organizations. I'm going to walk you through each one, who runs them, and where the money comes from, and where it goes. So, organization number 1, the People's Support Foundation. This is ground zero, the mothership, the place where the ThoughtWorks money first landed. In 2017, the same year Singham sold his company, an entity called Mutad LLC made a contribution to this newly formed foundation. The amount? $160.2 million. When asked about this, the foundation's treasurer, a man named Jason Fetcher, confirmed the foundation's endowment was quote, capitalized with the proceeds of the ThoughtWorks sale. Now, who is Jason Fetcher? He was ThoughtWorks general counsel from 2011 to 2017. He worked for Singham. And who's the president of this foundation? Jody Evans, co-founder of Code Pink. And here's the kicker. Singham's wife, they married in 2017. And her name's Jody Evans. So we have a foundation with $126 million in assets run by Singham's wife and former general counsel, funded by proceeds from the sale of Singham's company. That's one organization. Organization number 2, the Justice and Education Fund. This one was created in 2018, the year after Singham sold ThoughtWorks. Between 2018 and 2024, this organization took in $84 million in total revenue. $84 million. But here's what's fascinating. Pull up their most recent 990 filing, their tax return, and look at their current net assets. Negative $827,340. They're insolvent. This organization that processed $84 million is now underwater. Where did the money go? Their 2019 tax filing shows grants to 3 main recipients. The United Community Fund, $8.33 million. People's Welfare Association, $876,000. And here's the international connection. A company called PPK News Click Studio Private Limited in New Delhi, India, $1.32 million. That last one is important. In October 2023, Indian police raided News Click's offices. The founder, Prabir Prakayastha, was arrested under India's anti-terror laws. The allegation: receiving foreign funds and spreading Chinese propaganda. So money flowed from a Singham-connected foundation to an Indian media outlet that was later raided for allegedly spreading Chinese propaganda. But I want you to notice something else about the Justice and Education Fund. Look at who runs it. The director and secretary is a man named Manalo de los Santos. He's paid $80,000 a year. Remember that name. We're going to see it again. Organization number 3, the United Community Fund. This one is registered as a 501c4. That's a social welfare organization. It's based in New York. Now, I want you to pay close attention to the numbers here, folks. In 2019, the United Community Fund reported revenue of, and I'm not making this up, $39,959,903. That's almost $40 million in 1 year. Their expenses that same year, $38.3 million, almost all of it grants going out the door. Then look at 2022 revenue, $6,133, not $6 million, $6,000. This organization went from $40 million to $6,000 in 3 years. It was a fire hose that turned on, sprayed money everywhere, and then went dry. Who runs it? The executive director and president is Franziska Kleiner. Her day job? She's the social and economic justice lead at ThoughtWorks, Germany. So, we have another organization in this network run by a current ThoughtWorks employee. But here's what really caught investigators' attention. In 2019, one of the directors was a woman named Ting Chak. She left the position in August 2019. Who is Ting Chak? She's a Beijing-based researcher who works for something called Dongsheng News and the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. Senator Marco Rubio specifically named her in his August 2023 letter demanding a FARA investigation. That's the Foreign Agents Registration Act. So, we have a U.S. nonprofit that briefly had a Beijing-based researcher on its board, processed $40 million in a single year, and then essentially went dormant. Now, organization number 4, the People's Welfare Association. This one is the black box, and I need you to understand why it matters. The People's Welfare Association is registered as a 501c4 and based in Madison, Wisconsin. Between May 2019 and April 2022, it received about $35 million from the other organizations in this network, specifically from the People's Support Foundation and the Justice and Education Fund. And here's what it did with the money. It made grants exclusively to foreign recipients. Total amount sent overseas, folks, $50.8 million. Now, here's the critical part. Because it's a 501c4 filing a standard Form 990, not a private foundation filing a 990-PF, it is not required to disclose the identities of its foreign grant recipients. So read that again. $50 million went overseas, and there is no legal requirement to tell anyone where it went. The only information on Schedule F, that's the form for foreign grants, is the geographic region, not the specific organizations, not the names, nothing that would let you trace where the money actually landed. The Capital Research Center, a nonprofit watchdog, called this out explicitly. They wrote that by routing money through the People's Welfare Association, quote, the People's Support Foundation effectively concealed its grantees. This is legal. This is how the tax code works, but you need to understand what it means. $50.8 million left the United States through this network, and we have no idea, no legal documentation of who received it. Let's move to the organizations that are actually doing things on American streets. So organization number 5, folks, is the People's Forum. This is where the rubber meets the road, quite literally. This is the organization that actually runs events, organizes protests, and puts bodies in the streets. The People's Forum operates out of 320 West 37th Street in Manhattan, a physical space where they host events, film content for their media arm called Breakthrough News, and coordinate activist activities. Look at their 990 filings in 2024. They had $7.1 million in revenue and $12.9 million in net assets. They're financially healthy. Unlike the pass-through organizations that are now insolvent or dormant, the People's Forum is flush with cash. Now, look at who runs it. Executive Director Manalo de los Santos. Remember him? He's also the director and secretary of the Justice and Education Fund, one of the pass-through organizations, so he's wearing two hats. Secretary and treasurer Jodine Evans. That's Jody Evans, Singham's wife, the same woman who's president of the People's Support Foundation. She's on the board of the People's Forum, too. Board member Claudia de la Cruz. That name should ring a bell. Claudia de la Cruz was the 2024 presidential candidate for the Party of Socialism and Liberation, the PSL. So you have Singham's wife, a shared executive with another organization in the network, and a socialist presidential candidate, all on the board of the People's Forum. And in December 2021, the People's Forum publicly acknowledged receiving funding from Singham. They posted on what was then Twitter, now X, and I'm going to read you the exact quote. Quote, "A few years ago, we met Roy Singham, a Marxist comrade who sold his company and donated most of his wealth to nonprofits that focus on political education, culture, and internationalism," end quote. They called him a, quote, Marxist comrade. They admitted the funding relationship publicly. They went on to say, "It seems to bother," or then this is a quote, "it seems to bother some folk that we receive funding that furthers our anti-imperialist politics. It seems to bother them even more that our funder is also a staunch anti-imperialist whose work goes back to the Black Panthers. They're proud of this relationship. They're not hiding it. They're bragging about it." And some folks are probably going to try to say that, oh, well, they're probably going to try to bring race into this, being that it goes back to the Black Panthers. But that's besides the point. It has nothing to do with anybody's color or pigmentation of any kind. This is just flat out wrong. So before anybody goes in that direction, just stop. Organization number 6, the Progress Unity Fund. This one is the fiscal sponsor for the Answer Coalition. That's Act Now to Stop War and End Racism. That's the Answer Coalition. If you've seen protests with professionally printed signs that says things like "Hands Off ICE" or "Abolish ICE" with the Answer logo, those signs were funded through this organization. Progress Unity Fund has about $2.4 million in assets. Its officers include people directly connected to the Party for Socialism and Liberation. The former president, Susan Meisenberg, was a founding member of PSL. The current secretary, Claire Cook, is a PSL organizer. So we have a direct financial pipeline from the Progress Unity Fund to the Answer Coalition to the Party for Socialism and Liberation to the anti-ICE protests we're seeing on the news. Now, let me zoom out and show you what this structure really looks like. The personal web. Here's what makes this network so remarkable. It's not just money flowing between organizations. It's the same people wearing different hats at different entities. Jody Evans, Singham's wife, is the president of the People's Support Foundation and the secretary-treasurer of the People's Forum. 2 organizations, same person. Manalo de los Santos is the executive director of the People's Forum and the director and secretary of the Justice and Education Fund. 2 organizations, same person. Lion Folion is the education director at the People's Forum and a director and treasurer at the United Community Fund. 2 organizations, same person. Franziska Kleiner is the executive director and president of the United Community Fund, and she works for ThoughtWorks Germany, Singham's former company. Ting Chok, before she left in 2019, was the director of the United Community Fund, while also working as a Beijing-based researcher for Dongsheng News. How convenient for them. So do you see the pattern, folks? I mean, it's pretty blatantly obvious. A small group of interconnected individuals, many of them former or current ThoughtWorks employees, several of them with direct ties to Beijing, controls multiple organizations that together have processed over $250 million. This isn't speculation. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is what's written on their IRS tax returns. In 2023, the New York Times published a major investigation into this network. They reported that these organizations had, quote, almost no real footprints, many using UPS mailbox addresses. They described the money flowing through them as working, quote, like a financial geyser throwing out a shower of money from an invisible source, end quote. And they documented Singham's personal activities in China. According to the Times, Singham shares office space in Shanghai with something called the Mogul Group, which the Times described as part of the Chinese government's propaganda apparatus. In July of 2023, Singham was photographed at a Chinese Communist Party workshop about, quote, promoting the party internationally. In the photo, he's holding a notebook with a hammer and sickle on it. The Times reported that Singham co-owns a media company, which, by the way, if you don't know, the hammer and the sickle is the Communist Party's logo. So the Times reported that Singham co-owns a media company with the city government of Tongren and Guizhou province. that he started a consulting business with Chinese partners who were, quote, active in the propaganda apparatus, end quote, of the CCP. Now, Singham and his defenders push back hard on this characterization. They say he's a wealthy socialist philanthropist funding causes he believes in. They say attending a conference doesn't prove you take orders from the Chinese government. They say living in China doesn't mean you work for the CCP. And fair. That's the media criticism organization. Accused the New York Times of McCarthyism, saying the article, quote, insinuates but never demonstrates wrongdoing. And that's a fair point. Attending a conference isn't a crime. Having political opinions isn't a crime. Funding organizations that hold protest isn't a crime. But here's what is potentially illegal. Operating as a foreign agent without registering under FARA, the Foreign Agents Registration Act. And that's exactly what Congress is now investigating. So the investigation, let me bring you up to speed on what's happening right now. On September 4th, 2025, House Ways and Means Committee Chairman Jason Smith sent a letter to Manalo de los Santos, the head of the People's Forum. The letter doesn't mince words. I'm going to read you key sections. Chairman Smith wrote, quote, public reporting suggests that the People Forum has received over $20 million from Mr. Singham and his wife, Jody Evans, between 2017 and 2022 through shell companies and donor-advised funds, end quote. He continued, quote, the committee is concerned that receiving donations from an individual who lives in Shanghai has several business ties with companies and individuals linked to the CCP, works with and physically alongside a foreign propaganda company, and attends CCP forums on how to promote the party abroad means that you and the People's Forum are acting as agents of a foreign principal, as defined by the Foreign Agents Registration Act, while operating a taxpayer-supported tax-exempt entity in the United States, end quote. And then the threat, quote, using tax-exempt status to spread foreign propaganda while acting as a foreign agent is unacceptable and illegal. The committee the committee demanded documents by September 18th, 2025. They want a comprehensive list of all organizations the People's Forum fiscally sponsors, all donors who gave more than $5,000 since 2017, all communications with Singham since 2017, all communications with foreign principals since 2017. The People's Forum's response, they called it a, quote, desperate attempt to silence our work and crush dissent, end quote. They said the investigation is, quote, not just an attack on the People's Forum, but an assault on the fundamental rights of all people of conscience in the United States, end quote. Wow. But the House Ways and Means Committee isn't the only one investigating. The House Oversight Committee, led by Chairman James Comer, launched its own investigation in June 2025, specifically looking at Singham's alleged involvement in funding the anti-ICE riots in Los Angeles. In September 2025, Representative Comer and Ann Paulina Luna sent a letter to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent requesting that the Treasury evaluate whether to freeze Singham's assets. The letter listed 19 organizations allegedly connected to Singham and stated, Mr. Singham, a U.S. citizen with ties to the CCP, has been funding and supporting various extremist entities in the United States with the aim of causing destruction and division in our country, end quote. Senator Chuck Grassley, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, has sent letters to Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel requesting an investigation into whether the People's Forum and Code Pink should be required to register the FARA or register under FARA. And FBI Director Kash Patel himself has publicly stated, quote, the FBI is investigating any and all monetary connections responsible for these riots, end quote. Then, on January 7th, 2026, just a few weeks ago, the House Oversight Committee voted to subpoena Neville Roy Singham. Representative Luna said on the House floor, I'd like to make a motion to subpoena Neville Singham, a U.S. billionaire with reported ties to the CCP that's been funding extremist organizations, fueling division and civil unrest in this country, especially regarding the ICE riots last summer, end quote. The motion passed. There's just one problem. Singham lives in Shanghai, folks. And a congressional subpoena cannot be enforced outside U.S. borders. Former federal prosecutor Andrew Tchaikovsky explained it to Fox News in this way, quote, a subpoena can't be enforced essentially outside of our borders, essentially, end quote, unless the State Department issues a criminal indictment and arrest warrant, which would force Singham to return or face consequences. He can simply not show up. Representative Luna acknowledged this reality, posting on X that since Singham is, quote, refusing to testify voluntarily, Congress may push the State Department and Treasury to, quote, freeze his assets and revoke any visa he holds, end quote, as they should. She also claimed that Singham has been, quote, quietly sneaking in and out of this country, end quote. But as of today, Neville Roy Singham remains in Shanghai beyond the reach of congressional investigators. So, what do we know versus what we don't know? Now, I want to be very clear here because there is a difference between what the documents prove and what the investigators allege. So, what the 990 filings prove, over $250 million flowed through this network of organizations between 2017 and 2024. The small group of people, many connected to ThoughtWorks or to Singham personally, control multiple organizations in the network. Singham's wife is the president of the People Support Foundation and on the board of the People's Forum. Current and former ThoughtWorks employees run several of these organizations. Money went from this network to NewsClick India, which was later raided for allegedly spreading Chinese propaganda. $50.8 million went to undisclosed foreign recipients through the People's Welfare Association. The pass-through organizations are now depleted or insolvent. How ironic or convenient. The operational organizations, People's Forum and Progress Unity Fund, have banked significant capital and continue operations. These organizations are connected to PSL and Answer Coalition, which are organizing current anti-ICE protest. What the 990 filings do not prove, whether Singham takes direct orders from the Chinese Communist Party, whether individual protesters are being paid, which I would argue that I seen a video of this one lady that independent journalist was out there during a protest asking this lady what she was protesting, and she couldn't answer the question. She was like something along these lines, like I don't know, but I know I'm getting paid. Like, she blatantly said it. So I mean, all you have is her word to take at face value. Obviously doesn't even know what the hell she's out there protesting. She's just getting paid. And that's many of these cases. Coming straight from the individual's mouths in videos. But officially, I guess, there is no proof. Another thing they do not prove is whether violence at protest is directed by Singham or is spontaneous. Where exactly Singham's money enters the system, donor-advised funds obscure the trail, and the identities of the foreign organizations that received $50.8 million. Here's the hard truth. The financial network is documented. The personal overlap is documented. The organization connections to current protests are documented. What's not documented, at least not in public filings, is whether this constitutes foreign influence operations. That's what the FBI and Congress are trying to determine. So I want to take a step back for a moment and ask a harder question here. Why does this matter? Not in a partisan sense, not in a, quote, my team versus your team sense, but in terms of what it means for how we understand protest movements and political organizing in America. For decades, conservatives have claimed that left-wing protests are, quote, astroturfed, funded by wealthy donors to create the appearance of grassroots movements. And for decades, that claim was often dismissed or attributed to conspiracy thinking. George Soros became a boogeyman, invoked so often that the claim lost credibility through repetition. But what we're seeing here is different. This isn't speculation. This isn't interference. This is IRS tax filing showing specific dollar amounts flowing to specific organizations that are openly organizing specific protests. The People's Forum has publicly acknowledged receiving funding from Singham. They called him a, quote, Marxist comrade. They said they have, quote, nothing to hide. So the funding isn't a secret. What's in dispute is whether that funding represents foreign influence, specifically Chinese government influence. And here's where reasonable people can disagree. Is Singham a wealthy American socialist who happens to live in China and fund causes he believes in? Or is he a conduit for Chinese Communist Party influence operations designed to show discord in America? Which I would argue, regardless if he's with the Chinese Communist Party or not, if he's funding something like these ICE protests that are getting violent against federal agents trying to do their freaking job, that's a fucking problem in itself. That, to me, that's still an issue and shouldn't be allowed. So, his causes and what he believes in, if it's communism, then that's okay. To be causing this violence and pushing that agenda? I mean, I know there's free speech, but come on. Moving on. The congressional investigators believe it's the latter. The organizations in question say it's the former. What I can tell you is this: the structure exists. The money is real. The personnel connections are documented. The protests are happening. Whether you think this is legitimate political organizing or foreign-funded destabilization probably depends on your priors, but you should at least know the facts, and the facts are in the 990 filings. So, let me leave you with this. When I started this investigation, I expected to find either a dead end, conspiracy theories that fell apart under scrutiny, or a smoking gun that proved everything. What I found was something far more complicated. The financial network around Neville Roy Singham is real and documented. Hundreds of millions of dollars flowed through organizations with overlapping leadership, minimum public footprints, and connections to current protest movements. The man at the center of it all lives in Shanghai, attends Chinese Communist Party workshops on promoting the party internationally. Well, there you go. And shares office space with Chinese government propaganda operations. Again, there you go. His organizations have funneled $50 million overseas through entities that aren't required to disclose where the money went. And he's currently beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement. That's not speculation. That's what the documents show. What we don't know, what Congress and FBI are trying to determine, is whether this constitutes illegal foreign agent activity, whether Singham is following orders or following his conscience, whether the chaos in American streets is manufactured abroad or homegrown. The investigation is ongoing. The subpoena has been issued. The assets may be frozen. I'll be following this story. Having said, I'm your host, Roby, with the Manufactured Mind. If you found this episode valuable, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, in an age of manufactured narratives, the truth is found in the documents. Follow the money. Follow the money, folks. Have a wonderful day. Peace out.